I'm Andrea, one of the hosts of the Voice of San Diego podcast. Every week, I get together with the other editors at Voice and explain the news that matters in San Diego. Elections, politics, law enforcement, big investigations, and some fun stuff. The Great Palm Tree Debate, ranked choice voting, bike lane mania. It's great journalism and a lot of fun. Every Friday, wherever you listen to podcasts. Again, that's Voice of San Diego.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Season 5, Episode 15 of the Roast West Coast Coffee Podcast. I'm Ryan Wolt, and this is the show where I bring you the stories of coffee professionals, entrepreneurship, and coffee education. This is the second of our two-part interview with Nick Berardi, the 2022 U.S. Roasting Champion and head roaster at Mostra Coffee Company. He joined the show from Hawaii earlier this year, where he was enjoying the perks of being the U.S. Roasting Champion and starting to think about the World Roasting Championships, which are in Milan, Italy, later this week, June 23rd through the 25th. Nick and the Mostra team will be there representing the United States, which dovetails nicely into the final portion of this interview, in which we really go through Nick's competition experience, how he made his roasting plan personal, and what being part of a team means to him. Follow at Mostra Coffee on Instagram to see stories from Italy, and go to mostracoffee.com to see all of the roasted coffees they have on offer. And if you haven't heard of the Mostra Experience, be sure to click that tab. The 2022 Experience event isn't until October, but it's already on my calendar now. You can find those links in this show's notes, or subscribe to the newsletter on roastwestcoast.com. I'm on the road camping right now, so there is a very good chance that I'm heating up some water on the camp stove and getting ready to make an AeroPress coffee from a nearby local roaster. It's officially summer, but this week my wife and I are camping above 5,000 feet of elevation, so the mornings are still cool, making this fireside coffee all the more enjoyable. This is one of my coffee happy places. Where are your coffee happy places? I hope you're there now with your favorite coffee drink, and you're getting ready to get the full championship roaster experience, because it is time for the second and final part of this interview with the champ, Nick Berardi, head roaster of Mostra Coffee Company.
Yeah, it's... Sorry, I went off on a little tangent there.
No. I what I'm wondering really is kind of, what you did win. So what goes into that we don't necessarily see from the outside? Obviously the prep, but like when you're actually there that day in the time that you have, what is that moment like? I mean, how many batches are you roasting? Like, it's not like you're doing 25 batches, I'm assuming.
Yeah, and it is funny though, this even, you're saying, we don't know what's going on. And you said, what was that day like? It was basically 3 full days of basically working. So I missed the orientation on Wednesday evening because I bought my flight as soon as the expo was announced. And the online learning session before the competition, they said that orientation would be Wednesday evening. But I showed up early at about 6 a.m. on Thursday to meet with Sheila from the SCA U.S. Coffee Championships. And she was super awesome and showed me around, showed me where, the tent outside in Boston in the 40 to 50 degree weather with the roasters was. And the area where the judges would be, where the green grading competition would be, and where the roasters cupping area was. And then from there, that Thursday morning, they had it set up to where the first stage of the competition, the sample roasting, where you're given 600 grams of the competition coffee and 40 minutes on the roaster. Everybody was scheduled at the same time of day for their roast sessions. So I roasted on Thursday and on Friday and on Saturday. All my roasts were at about 1:15 to 1:30 in the afternoon. So the people who were roasting at 7:30 in the morning were still dealing with the same conditions, 7:30 basically every day of the week, as long as the weather was consistent. So The competition committee for the roasters, the judges and the volunteers did an amazing job of mitigating any exigent circumstances as they could. But I had my opportunity to just hang out and wait until I roasted Thursday at about 1:30 in the afternoon. And I met a lot of the other competitors. A lot of them had brought coffee with themselves. So I got to know a handful of people, went out and prior to going out for my sample roast, people were talking, I'm going to do 2 batches at 300 grams each, or I'm going to do 1 batch at 600 grams. And I had only roasted 500 to 600 gram batches in my preparation for the competition. That was because the old manual that I had taken a look at was based on the previous roaster manufacturer. And so the sample mass that I assumed we were going to be giving was 500 grams. So I thought, okay, well, I'm not going to be able to roast 250 grams and get 2 roasts in on a stronghold. That's too low to hit the sensor just by that much. But the committee, the judges realized this before the competition and put out an update prior to sample roasting beginning that we were going to be giving 600 grams of coffee. So I was back and forth during the day, but when I went out to the tent for my sample roast, I ended up doing 2 300 gram batches. Since I knew that I wasn't going to have a very strong grasp on what the metrics, halogen at 9 or the adjustments on the actual roaster needed to be for such small batches, because I hadn't done it before. I just figured that I would roast the coffee to be super light and fast, and then one really low and slow medium plus batch. Other people took different approaches. Some people did a more traditional sample roast. Some people did 300. Some people just did a 600 gram batch, because at the end of the competition, at the end of the day on Saturday, we all had to hand in 1 full pound of coffee to the judges for them to cup. And so a 600 gram batch would easily yield that. So competing mindsets, both had, pros and cons. If you do 2 smaller batches, you get to experience more of what the coffee has to offer. If you did 1 larger batch, you get to see how the coffee would roast at a potential production profile. So everybody took different things to it and different things away from that.
Quick question, and I'm going to plead ignorance here. That 1 pound batch that you turn in, is that a combination of the 3 days that you're roasting, or the different batches, or is it separate batches?
As we walk through how the competition went for all the roasters, that'll be more elucidated. But that was the roast that I did Saturday. So my Thursday was just sample roasting. Over the first 2 days, Thursday and Friday, they split competitors out for green grading coffee, which is something that people do for Q grading. But we're given an evaluation sheet where we have to measure the moisture of the coffee, the density of the coffee, judge the color of the coffee. This is all green. The color of the unroasted coffee, the aroma, the odor of unroasted coffee. Then use screens to size grade the coffee, and then pick out defects. And that part of the competition for me almost cost me the whole thing, because that was a 24-point score sheet. 18 points of it was the defect section. And I think I got 11 out of 18 on the defect section. That goes to, again, what I was saying about, even though I won the competition, I'm still relatively a novice roaster, because I was looking at any bean that potentially had any insect damage and categorizing that as partial insect damage. That's not how it works. A lot of aspects with how the roasters competition is set up is to make sure that you don't accidentally do the best. So I'll talk about the roast plan in a couple seconds, but there's no way to accidentally roast the best coffee, I guess I would say, in this competition. My green grading, I did not do very well on, and that's what I'm going to practice a lot for before Milan coming up in June. The green grading session, I was in the room with Rudy from Altomato from Illustra Coffee. Hi, Rudy. And he was done in like 12 minutes. And he was the only person to get a perfect score on it. And I asked him about it. Not only is he a Q grader, but anytime he wants to go buy coffee, he just drives to a farm in Mexico and he actually grades the coffee himself. So it's just an old hat for him. For me, I definitely need to practice on the precision of what it actually is, because again, I was picking out things like thinking, okay, well, this doesn't look that great. I'm going to throw it in the defect pile. And that's not the precision that the competition calls for. The competition calls for the precision of knowing, is this a withered bean or is this a immature bean? And if you look at the typical SCA defect chart, they look pretty close to the same, but there are some distinct differences. Or like a bean can have like a fold in it that would either look like a withered bean or potentially look like insect damage, and in the end not actually be considered a defect. So that's something that I ran into with that. I didn't do my green grading until Friday. So I roasted my sample on Thursday and then kind of took an idea. Whenever we were executing any part of the competition as a roaster, one of the judges or the volunteers would escort us. So we got our coffee inside at the expo, and they carried it outside with us to the roaster and set it down, where another judge then took over, just to make sure nobody was doing any hanky panky with the coffee or anything like that. And then we were given 5 minutes to prep the roaster, 40 minutes to roast, and 5 minutes to clean up our area. And then we were escorted back inside with the roasted coffee in a coated bag to hand in. The next day on Friday, we were able to cup our roasted coffee. That was the coffee that was for the competition. So it was a washed Columbia. And one of the things I learned from other competitors is look at the sponsors of the competition. The sponsor of the roasters competition for green coffee was Ally Coffee. And so almost all the other roasters knew it was either going to be a Colombia or a Brazil, and that the competition probably wasn't going to give us a Brazil. So I learned that a little too late. I'd practiced with like some Ethiopia, some El Salvador, some Papua New Guinea, just all types of stuff. But that was the coffee they were given for the sample roast, and at the end for the final production roast. So we cupped, and I figured out a couple different things about how I wanted to present my coffee to the judges. And the green grading was actually done with different coffee. It was not the competition coffee, so that we wouldn't be able to glean any information from green grading the coffee that might inform how we would want to roast the coffee. So cupped and cupped and cupped. I think I cupped my own coffee 4 times on Friday. And then I did my green grading, and then we did our practice roast. The practice roast session I did right after my green grading session, and that was a session where we were given another different coffee that was not the competition coffee. This one was also a washed Columbia, though. And this one, I guess the idea behind this practice roast was you have 40 minutes on the roaster to basically do like a proof of concept. So at that point, everybody had cupped their coffee. You can go out there with a similar coffee and say, hey, if I roast it like this, like, am I going to be able to stick to my graph? And then once we roasted that coffee, they took it away from us and we never saw it again. I think they donated it to charity. So we had no idea of the actual taste attributes that roast would give us other than what we're informed of as roasters with our experience. So that was day 2, green grading, cupping, and practice roasting. And then the evening after day 2, going into basically all morning for day 3, I was writing out the roast plan. So the sample roast was not scored. That was just for us to be able to taste the competition coffee. The practice roast was not scored. That was just for us to be able to kind of see what we might want to do as the profile. The green grading was scored, and the roast plan was scored. The roast plan itself had a couple different scored categories. The back side of the sheet was where you had to mark on an intensity scale what you thought your sweetness, your body, and I think it was acidity would be on the coffee that you had yet to roast. And then I also wrote about 3 paragraphs about the aroma, fragrance, and taste would be for the coffee I had yet to roast. And then they scored all that stuff on accuracy from when they cupped the coffee. The front side of the sheet is you have to write out. There's a little section where you can write your roast plan, but you get scored on your start weight, your finish weight, your color scale reading for whole bean and green coffee, start temperature and finish temperature. I did really well on the roast plan. Nailed my. I think I don't remember. I missed points on the color meter thing because again, I'm a newer roaster, and we didn't have a color meter at Mostra before this competition. So using one of those to guess the difference between the color of whole bean and roasted coffee was not, or of ground coffee rather, was not something that I had experience with. But there's going to be, if something scores like a 68 on a color scale for roasted coffee, the difference is not always linear. So it's not always going to score like a 58 on a ground grind color. If you roasted it really fast, it might score like a 54, a lighter, lower color. If you roasted it long, slow, and low, it might even be up closer to within a few points of the other coffee. That's another thing that I learned. I didn't miss many points on that part, though. The next part was the final roast, and that was the part where I felt like I should have been nervous, but I wasn't.
I was wondering if in that final roast you could feel the clock ticking down, so to speak. You know, the tension of the moment. Do you feel that? Are you feeling that competition, or are you just in your own head?
No, I mean, I was just there. It was just roasting coffee. Yeah, there's certain things that'll make you nervous in life, and we all have our different foibles. I have trouble feeling shame, but also I was one of those annoying kids back in school who was a good test taker. Everybody hates that kind of guy. Yeah, and so when it came to this competition, it was just another test. I did have a little bit of a hiccup because I hadn't. I basically turned off all the notifications on my phone on Saturday before my final roast, and so I showed up at my scheduled time and submitted my roast plan. But there apparently had a couple hours before been announced a delay, that something occurred where everybody was being pushed back a little bit. Because I checked in and got my coffee and I was escorted out to the tent, I got out there and somebody was on my roaster. There were three roasters in the tent. They were all basically the same roaster, but talking to the other roasters, we all kind of figured out, oh, are you on roaster one or are you on roaster three? We all kind of got slight differences out of what temperature readings were. And so they offered to me, oh, you can go on roaster one right away. And I was like, no, I'm going to roast on the roaster that I wrote my plan for, roaster three, where a different gentleman had just started roasting. The other aspect I forgot to mention about this is that when you go out there, you're taking your tray of your empty bags for your finished product and your discard coffee and your defect bag and your green coffee in another bag. And that's it. You're not allowed to take out notes or any technology or anything like that. So before I went in to check in for my final roast, I was basically just, I called it Bart Simpsoning for like the last hour or two before roasting. It's just constantly rewriting my recipe of what I was going to roast so I can memorize it, so that in between the few minute walk from checking in to getting out to my roaster, I could just write it down real quick and I'd be good to go. But because somebody was on my roaster and my chaperone went back inside and all the other judges were busy, I asked Emily, who's works at Mercon Specialty, and we've imported bought some coffee from them. She's really awesome. I was like, can I write my stuff down now? No, not until you're on the roaster. So I was pacing back and forth for like 20 some minutes, just repeating my numbers in my
Wow.
head to try to keep it all fresh. 632 grams in, 562 grams out, or 538 grams out. Yeah, I'm rusty on it now, but I was just like, and then going through the adjustments in my head, the times and the different temperatures when I was going to make adjustments to either the halogen, the air, or the agitation and all of that. So that was the part where I got a little stressful during those 20 minutes. But once my roaster cleared, Emily let me check onto my machine. I got my blank piece of paper out and wrote down my recipe. I looked at it. Yeah, it was the right one. So
You're gonna wake up in like a month in the middle of the night and just shout out something from the recipe, like
it already happened.
632 grams. Oh.
Yeah, it already happened. One of the reasons why it was easy for me to remember some of the numbers is because I wanted to make sure this really meant something to me. And we talked a little bit earlier about the experience of dealing with slight variability in certain things. And I knew what I basically wanted my batch size to be so that I could groom out some defects of the coffee, because the competition coffee had a pretty wide variance in screen size. Lots of little guys, lots of big guys, but mostly in the middle. So I knew I was going to have to sort a lot of that stuff out at the end. Since we only had to turn in a pound of coffee, I roasted so I'd have at least enough to sort out like 70 or 80 grams of coffee if I needed to. But instead of just sticking with something that was, numbers that could have been any numbers, I knew I wanted my start temperature to be in the mid 350s in terms of the initial temperature of the roaster. So I went 356 because I grew up 56 Parkview was my childhood home. Pick numbers, as many numbers that made sense without pushing the envelope of what I could thermally accomplish to include 62, because June 2nd was my dog's birthday. And she died last year, and I was like, yeah, we'll make this mean something. Sorry. I still get a little emotional talking about her, but so those numbers were easy to remember. The adjustment numbers on the roaster were a little bit more different. But once I got out there and wrote everything down, it was just go time. And I actually found out afterwards that there were videographers kind of flitting around the area and catching different shots and things like that. I thought they were just shooting like B-roll for use later. So one of them, Karina from Savor Brands, who sponsored my trip out to Hawaii here, where I'm going to do a roasting seminar for the Hawaii Coffee Association. Karina was going around taking some videos, and I had met her earlier in the expo, and so I was just joking with her while I was roasting because I was feeling loose. And I found out afterwards, and I felt like, man, if I ended up not doing well, the fact that it was on Instagram Live streaming, it would have looked like this guy isn't taking this seriously. I was, but I was just feeling loose. So I almost, that knowing that I ended up placing first place and I was joking around on the video live stream of the competition, I felt kind of like, put on the cool sunglasses kind of thing there for a second. I know I'm not. I know that doesn't make a lick of difference one way or another, but that was the lead up, the 3 days of basically working that were the competition to lead up to the huge anticipation we ended up with on Sunday.
And I've heard this story about how you thought somebody else standing up there with you was going to win, and so you kind of gave them a
Twice,
fist bump.
yeah.
Twice, yeah. You're like, oh,
Yeah.
well, their name didn't get called, so they're going to be the winner, so I'm going to fist bump them now because I'm going to get called.
Well, so it was interesting. I talked to a lot of other competitors and judges about previous competitions and things like that. And everybody had talked about how, a lot of times roasters competition would be announced first. It doesn't have the spectacle of the other competitions. The barista stage is like a bunch of rock stars, Brewers Cup draws a lot of eyes because people are really interested in innovative techniques. Cup tasters, my favorite thing to watch that Ryan competed in is just tension, waiting for somebody to yell, "We gotta die!" But roasters, it's all done with that. We didn't have crowd service this year. There's not a lot of interaction or exhibition. So a lot of times they announce it first because I guess most of the attendees just don't really pay much attention to it, even though we're, the people who are responsible for a good chunk of flavor in coffee, not bitter or anything. Anyway, what was really interesting, though, is we took the day, Ryan and Andy and Paloma, Ryan's wife, and some Mostra crew people to kind of walk around. We went to a place called Broadsheet Roasters in Harvard Square. Aaron McDougall, one of the competitors who ended up placing 7th, it's his shop. Real cool spot. We just kind of walked around for a while, showed up at the expo to catch the finals of Cup Tasters Championship. And as they were setting up for Cup Tasters, could see behind the stage for Cup Tasters that the judges for roasters were starting another cupping. It was just like, we were all just like, wait a minute, what's going on? Didn't they all? And I never really asked or got final word about what it was, whether everything was so close that they had to recup, or there might have been something wrong with the first cupping, or whatever it may have been. But the whole time I'm trying to watch Cup Tasters, I'm looking over at the judges all recupping all the coffees, and they were at it for a while, to where a lot of us roasters were talking to each other like, what do you think's going on? What's this like? Is this good or is this bad? And they were still actually cupping and judging the coffee when announcements started. The delayed announcements started for winners of other competitions, and so they did. They announced. I don't remember the exact order, but they did latte art and coffee and good spirits and Brewers Cup, I think, and there was another one they announced. But about halfway through those other announcements, we looked back and some of the other roasters had actually gone back and gotten the leftover samples of their coffee because the judges turned the results in. So I went back there and I grabbed my sample bag and I popped one in my mouth without looking, and it didn't taste very good. It had a little carbony taste to it, and I was just like, "Oh, f this." I'm sorry. I'm censoring my profanity because we swear a lot at work.
No. Feel free. We're a coffee show. There's profanity.
And so I went over to where the Mostra crew were sitting, and I just put my beans in my backpack. I was like, "Yeah, guys, I don't think we got it. I don't think I made the podium." And so I went over to talk to some of the other roasters, and everybody was pouring their beans on the little table. There was no grinders or brewing equipment; it had all been packed up at that point. So we were all just like looking at the color and like eating each other's coffees. And I was talking to one of the other people. I think it was Evan from Elixir Coffee. I think he was like, "Oh yeah, grab me your business card. While you're grabbing it, grab your coffee." And so I was like, "All right, fine, no harm." So I grabbed my beans and I went over and I poured them on the table, and they looked a lot better than I expected. They looked pretty good, and I tasted my coffee, and I ate a couple more beans, and it was basically just as sweet as the sweetest coffee I had tasted from anybody else. And so I was like, "Oh, hold on now." Like, I guess that what I mentioned earlier, there was a lot of variance in the beans. I missed when I was grooming one of the larger beans that had scorched on the face a little bit, and that just ended up being the first one I popped in my mouth. So I had a complete 180 of like, "Oh dang, I might still be in this." And then they announced that they were going to start announcing roasters, and so at that point I was kind of turned around. I didn't know what to expect, and then the guy who I thought was going to win it all got announced as sixth place. And that turned me around even more. Joe is what he goes by, named Wimbo Yang. He's a guy out of Portland. We got to talk a lot of coffee over the weekend. Super, like one of the smartest coffee people you're going to meet. He builds his own latte art robots. And in Orange County qualifiers in 2020, he beat second place by as much as second place beat 13th place. So he basically lapped the field in qualifiers. And when they announced him sixth, I was thinking, okay, what else is going on here? So I got faked out at that point, and then they were going through and announcing Andrew, another Portland guy, in fifth, and then Evan in fourth. And I was like, oh, I actually cupped with him a couple times, like. And then they announced Rudy in third, and I was like, oh, I cupped with Rudy a handful of times. They announced Jenna Padoka in second. I was like, I cupped with her a bunch too, actually. I was standing next to Justin, who owns ASIP Coffee in Merced, California. We had met in Oakland and then also in Orange County, and talked a little bit over the weekend in Boston. So that's when I looked over at him and just like I was like, well, it's all or nothing, and we fist bumped because I felt really good about his coffee. But then they said my name instead, and from there it was kind of a blur until I called my dad. So yeah. I expected to perform in a way that I would be proud of myself and be able to learn and grow for the next year's competition. And I guess I just had grown enough over the past couple of years roasting at Mostra that I was able to adapt to what I needed to do to roast what the judges would find to be the best coffee.
Well, it's an incredible achievement. I mean, congratulations. And then next up in that competition path you mentioned earlier is the World Championships in Milan in June. And I assume that'll just be like old hat by the time you get there. Since you've already done this, you already got a championship under your belt. What's one more, right?
Well, there's a lot more to it. The world stage has proven challenging for a lot of different people in a lot of different competitions, and historically how the United States Roasting Championship has changed over the years. This year, I think it probably mirrored the world competition more than any other year. I can't say for certain because I hadn't participated in previous years' competitions. It's going to be different. The roaster is going to be in front of a grandstand. There's going to be bleachers of people watching me roast my competition roasts. There's going to be single origin as well as a blend component to the competition. So there's going to be the sponsored coffee and then 3 other coffees to also roast and also write roast plans accurately for and write a blend plan and then get scored on all of that in addition to green grading. So it's just taking, it's, Spinal Tap. It's just taking the US comp and kind of turning it up to 11. So there's quite a bit of practice to do to get ready for that. The roaster sponsors for Worlds are going to be Stronghold again for sample roasting, which I'm familiar with now, and Gießen, which way back at the beginning of my story, the first real roaster that I apprenticed on was a 15 kilo Gießen with Heather back at Bird Rock. That was the first Gießen to ever hit the United States. So the 6 kilo model that I'll be roasting on in Milan is going to be way different. It's going to have some bells and whistles. So I'm going to have to hunt down some practice time on one of those in the next, 3 or 4 weeks before I take off. But yeah, it's going to be great. I've joked around with people. It's almost starting to feel like I'm Team USA here.
I know that everyone at Mostra is excited for what you've already done and what just the potential of what lays ahead and being part of that. I'm wondering what role your teammates have in helping you, either preparing or guiding you through the event, or just to be there supporting you. Because one thing I notice about Mostra, I don't want to say more than other shops, but it's just something that's very out front with Mostra, is that you really are a team. Like there seems to be a lot of like engagement in like a team kind of atmosphere, which I don't want to say isn't like the first thing you notice with other roasters ever. It just is seemingly so obvious with Mostra.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a no man is an island sort of thing, but at the same time, this is a lot of companies talk about, oh, our family, this and that and the other. But I mean, Mostra really does feel like a second family to me. And it's especially important with family, my family's 2,000 miles away back in Ohio or in Michigan. And so having that support, and then it's not just, oh, it feels like family. Like for a lot of them, it actually is family. Jalyn, one of the owners of Mostra, 3 of her sisters work at the company. 2 of the owners, Bev and Sam, are married and have been together since high school. Mike, the 4th owner, cooks family meals for us all the time, which are freaking amazing because he's cooked at Michelin star restaurants, and he runs his own private dining called the Lab Dining Experience. Ownership makes sure that it's not just, Mostra is family, TM, do 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 do. It's not like that. It's when there's hardships in our lives, they're there to talk. And if we need help, if somebody needs covered at work, whatever it is, we're all there. We're all hands on deck for each other in all aspects of our lives. So that is something that, I guess, if it's evident as a company, it's just because it's evident in the people that comprise the company. That aspect of contribution that I mentioned earlier is really because we care about each other and we care about those around us in our communities, whether that community is our household or our neighborhood or our coffee community that stretches from the Philippines to Yemen to, wherever it may be, to here in Hawaii, where I met an awesome farmer named Delvin so far, and I'm going to meet a couple more awesome people. And we actually met Delvin, the farmer, on his 1-year-old daughter Leela's birthday yesterday, and it's just it's that sense of community and caring and contributing and giving back and supporting each other is that evident thing, and that's really the same thing with the competition thing is. We all have our own mental foibles and things like that. And for me, in the competition and in the lead up to the competition, part of it was just like I put my blinders in and just zoned. I wouldn't have been able to do that without people supporting the rest of what otherwise I would have been doing. Or, with after, I take the blinders off and we're cupping coffee with the whole production team, Ryan, Aya, Andy, Tim, Mike, everybody, coming together and, not holding back on anything. We're all honest with each other on that stuff. So yeah, it's a lot of support that's going to kind of take me through the next month and through Milan and beyond that. And it's a good thing.
Yeah, very cool. Very cool to see from the outside and inspiring as well for those of us who have worked either in this industry or just in industries where we felt that feeling of community and family. I already grilled Ryan on kind of what's next for Mostra Coffee, so I'm going to let you off the hook with that one just for today. But I do want to make sure that I ask is if there's anything I didn't ask you today about you or about Mostra that you wanted to share. And then when you are out in the world and you stop into another coffee shop or another coffee roaster, what do you order?
I can't really think of anything too much that I want to share about myself. It's kind of went over my journey in coffee, and I mentioned there, some, personal things to get over along the way. And I guess if anything, that's something is to, one of the things after winning the competition, it's still sinking in that I won the competition. And part of that sinking in was a little kind of episode of imposter syndrome where I was feeling like, do I belong here? And that can sneak up on, people, that or different mental health challenges can sneak up on people in times they don't expect or when you would expect it and you still can't deal with it. And just, mental health is a super important thing for everybody. So, that's something that we all need to more recognize as a society. So I guess, from myself to talking everybody at large, that's one thing I would say. In terms of what I order when I go into a shop, usually I just go for a straight shot of espresso first thing. If I'm feeling fancy, I'll get like a shot and a drip or something like that. My favorite coffee drink is a macchiato. And I am the worst customer to order a macchiato because when I go any place and I drink a shot of espresso, no matter how good or bad the shot is, I'll be able to at least find 3 positive things to say about it if somebody says, "Hey, how was it?" But macchiato is like that's my there's a Vonnegut book about this guy who is painting this masterpiece and it's hidden in a barn and he doesn't want anybody to see it. And it's like macchiato to me is like, don't F with my macchiato. And I'm very particular and I'm a dick about it. And so I don't order macchiato at a place until I've been there a couple times. Like I don't even ask our new baristas for macchiato at Mostra until I've had a couple shots from them, just because they're already nervous enough around me. So yeah, I'm a espresso.
That's an incredible amount of self-awareness, Nick. I appreciate you sharing that with me. Also, anyone listening, go read everything Kurt Vonnegut's ever written. Nick, I really just appreciate you taking time off from your trip to talk to me and to the people listening to this show. And, once again, I congratulate you on what you've achieved and wish you the best, moving forward. And we're going to be excited to follow along.
Aces, thanks for having me.
Okay, to recap. This show is about tangents. Coffee is just the beginning. I learned a lot about the competition experience today, and by extension, how Nick thinks about the world. The first surprise was that the event in Boston was outside in a tent. I assumed due to COVID, but there was an indoor convention. Knowing that it was spring, and temperature and humidity can impact a roast, it seems crazy that there would be such a drastic variable unaccounted for. Nick specifically would seemingly have fairly little roasting practice in that sort of climate. He lives and works here in San Diego. It was 52 degrees with 75% humidity in Boston on the last day of the event. The second surprise, which should have been obvious, probably was obvious to you, and just not to me, was that if everyone is using the same roasting machines, then many of the roasters wouldn't have experience on those machines. Part of the challenge to becoming the roasting champion is being able to adapt to those types of changes presented to you in real time. Also, probably obvious when considering that the championship is a sponsored event, is that the coffees are provided at the event. And you don't know beforehand which coffee you'll be working with. I think that I assumed, similar to the World Beer Championships, competitors would roast their own coffee to submit. There is an entirely added pressure when it is live in the moment with unknown equipment and an unknown coffee. Finally, to be the roasting champion, you have to be able to do more than just drop beans into the machine. It is a 3-day all-encompassing experience. Nick had to grade green coffee for quality and defects. He roasted, he cupped. He examined the individual beans in his roasted coffee before turning them in on Saturday. And I mean examined them. Competitors go through looking for defects and potential sour beans or aesthetically displeasing ones. Nick mentioned a color meter challenge, and I assumed he meant a printed chart of the potential roasts of a coffee bean. But, no. This is a piece of fancy equipment that literally is measuring the color of the beans, either whole or ground. And this is used to determine a whole host of bean qualities. I'm going to make sure that gets covered in a future episode of Coffee Smarter. A huge thank you and a congratulations go to Nick and the team at Mostra Coffee for their U.S. victory. I'll be cheering them on at the World events later this week, in spirit at least. Unless there is room in the Mostra Airbnb in Milan for one more. I'm just saying, I could curl up in the corner, or bring my own hammock. I'll link to the World Championship site on roastwestcoast.com, and also add links to mostracoffee.com, and as I mentioned at the top, be sure to follow at Mostra Coffee on Instagram to see those World Championship updates. Since you're already clicking around on the internet, you might as well subscribe to this show's newsletter at the aforementioned roastwestcoast.com. You'll never miss an episode with the free subscription, or be cool and help this show grow by choosing one of the paid subscription options. Thank you for subscribing at roastwestcoast.com, and thank you to my industry partners who've been helping me build a foundation for this podcast, including Mostra Coffee Company, Steady State Coffee Roasting, Camp Coffee Company, Ignite Coffee Company, Ascend Roasters, Coffee Cycle Roasting, First Light Whiskey, Maria Coffee, Cape Horn Coffee Importers, and Café La Terre. I'll be drinking all of those great coffees and whiskeys this summer, and I hope you are too. Find links to the businesses, subscriptions, and everything else I mentioned on the show today in this episode's notes or online at roastwestcoast.com. I say roastwestcoast.com a lot. I hope it's working. Thanks to all of you for listening. This episode of the Roast West Coast Coffee Podcast has been written, produced, and recorded by me, Ryan Wolt. I hope this show has found you happy, healthy, and with at least enough sanity to make it through the day. For those of you headed out for a cup of coffee this week, please always tip your baristas and be sure to drink good coffee. Happy Father's Day, Dad.
I like beer.
Hey everyone, if you like the Roast West Coast Coffee Podcast, you might also appreciate the I Like Beer the Podcast. Listening to these guys is like being a fly on the wall of the pub with a few of your favorite mates having a pint. These professional beer appreciators have plenty of stories to share on everything from the mating habits of penguins to their behind-the-scenes brewery experiences. Check out the I Like Beer the Podcast wherever you are listening to this show about coffee, or head to ilikebeerthepodcast.com.